West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Another cooperator. Today, another member of the pro-Trump right-wing paramilitary group, the Proud Boys, pled guilty for his role in the January 6th attack and also agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. This makes three members of the so-called Proud Boys who've pled guilty. One of those who's cooperating is cooperating in the seditious conspiracy case the Justice Department has brought against the group. There's also a seditious conspiracy case pending against the members of another proto-fascist, pro-Trump paramilitary group called the Oath Keepers. Seditious conspiracy is a specific, rarely charged, very serious crime that the Justice Department has had a heck of a time in previous cases proving it, the very few times it's ever been used in the U.S. criminal law. But one of the things we are learning from the indictments and from the court filings in those sedition cases and in the public hearings by the January 6th investigation is that these paramilitary groups were apparently an important, integral part of the plot to try to overthrow the government, to stop the certification of the last election by using force inside the U.S. Capitol. The January 6th investigators have laid out how hundreds of these Proud Boys marched to the Capitol hours before Trump directed the crowd at his rally that they should go to the Capitol. They started attacking police just as Trump started sending the big mob their way. They were effectively the tip of the spear. They breached the Capitol, and then the mob was there to roll in behind them. The chairman of the January 6th investigation says at upcoming hearings, witnesses will describe conversations between these paramilitary groups that led the breach of the Capitol and people in the orbit of then President Trump. They're charged with sedition. And then there's him. But, you know, these aren't the only fascist right-wing paramilitary groups that are operating on the bleeding edge of right-wing politics right now. Just this past weekend, for example, there was this.
These guys stopped a U-Haul full of dudes.
A swarm of extremists who Idaho police say came to riot. 31 suspected white nationalists zip-tied and arrested blocks from a pride festival.
There was at least one smoker grenade. There was multiple shields.
Coeur d'Alene police Saturday discovered the crowd crammed in a U-Haul after a 911 caller described seeing a little army at a local hotel with masks on their faces and slogans like Reclaim America on their shirts. Police charging all 31 with conspiracy to riot, noting they planned to swarm several parts of Coeur d'Alene and carried paperwork similar to an operations plan that a police or military group would put together. They traveled in from states all across the country, allegedly united by white nationalism.
They appeared to be affiliated with the group Patriot Front.
They call themselves Patriot Front. They have ridiculous little uniforms. You might recognize them by their distinctive matching khakis, which is supposed to be menacing instead of making it look like they all just got off work together at Best Buy. But this was them in D.C. last year, trying to intimidate with their little homemade shields and their JV soccer shin guards. This group is a renamed version of one of the white nationalist groups that took part in the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017. The group renamed itself after one of its members killed Heather Heyer, a counter-protester, and seriously injured a ton of other people when he deliberately drove his speeding car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters. But them targeting the Pride event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho this weekend, one of the most unnerving things about the reporting on this was that Patriot Front was apparently not even the only armed far-right group that was targeting that particular Pride event in that particular part of Idaho this weekend. Another so-called Patriot group had planned a show off your gun event to coincide with and menace that same Pride gathering in Coeur d'Alene. The same weekend, a different group of Proud Boys stormed into a library in the San Francisco Bay Area and disrupted a children's story session, shouting anti-gay and anti-trans threats because the story time was led by a drag queen, and so they were there to break it up by force. You will notice that the targets of these various fascist pro-Trump paramilitary groups like Patriot Front, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, you'll notice that their targets are the political targets of our current Republican Party, right? The paramilitary groups are providing physical attacks, physical intimidation to reinforce political attacks. You know, Democrats and deep state actors are trying to steal the election. Well, these will be the groups that'll be the tip of the spear that violently storm into the Capitol to stop that. You know, gay folks and trans folks are going after our children, right? Well, these groups will storm pride festivals and supposedly objectionable children's story groups and menace people with weapons and with threats. They'll put physical force behind the political threats from the Republican Party. There are historical and sociological reasons behind the existence of fascist paramilitary organizations in the United States. This is not our first rodeo with these clowns. But it is a different thing altogether when paramilitary groups like this start playing a political function adjunct to one of the two major parties in our country. That is a very, very bad sign.
It is Wednesday, the 15th of June of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Hey, I heard the Southern Baptist organization is going to go full MAGA. That apparently they are going to get rid of woke racist Marxism. Woke race Marxism. I don't know. Where do they come up with this BS? You do know that back in the day when the civil rights movement, or even just like when slaves in the 20th century, former slaves in the 20th century tried to vote, and they were getting lynched from magnolia trees and whatever was handy. Those activities of trying to have equality and due process was labeled communist and Marxist. Just letting you know, because I guess to a Nazi and a fascist, anything that approaches equality between individuals has to be commie and Marxist. Just has to be. Okay. I thought it was democratic, but you can't say that word. Yeah, that was another thing I noticed, that these MAGA types who were giving testimony to the J6 committee, or their depositions at least, and testimony, video testimony, how they were stumbling over the word of representative democracy. They just couldn't say it. They had to say a republic. They couldn't even say democratic republic, because democratic is just such a bad word. They just can't have the term democracy. It just got to be republic. They were having such a hard time. It cracked me up, because what that means is that the brainwashing has been imbued for many, many decades. Probably from the time they were little children, and I would say Republicans, like Nazis, are not born, they are groomed. Groomed, I'm telling you. And what better example of that as this guy, Matt Shea from Washington State, who was a representative in Washington, and he was aligned with neo-Nazi groups and got run out of office. Well, apparently at least two of the Patriot Front brown shirts that showed up at Coeur d'Alene the other day are intimately affiliated with this Shea, and just, gives a little bit more color to all of this. And I want to remind folks that this guy Shea was also a person who set up an adoption agency to traffic war-torn Ukrainian kids. Apparently, they've run out of, brown kids at the border. And I would also think that maybe Shea saw that Betsy DeVos cornered that market, so he had to find a product. And he found it. Thank you, Vladimir Putin. Okay, it's sick. So whenever they talk about child trafficking, they're doing it. And I got to tell you, what they're doing is very reminiscent of what Pinochet, or is it Pinochet, did back in the day when he took the children of the disappeared, and those people who became disappeared because of Pinochet, or is it Pinochet, and took those kids and, quote, adopted them, end quote, out to generals and other military staff and political cronies, where pretty much they became, servants of the house. All right. And where did they get that idea? Where did Pinochet, or is it Pinochet, get the idea? Yep. School of the Americas, CIA. And now it's come full circle, hasn't it? Yes, it has. All right. Well, we're in deep doo-doo. It looks like over 100 election-denying, anti-democratic, and I don't mean the party, okay? We're not afraid to say that word around here, are we? Over 100 election-denying candidates are on the ballot. Well, I guess if you don't teach physics for the better part of half a century, no requirement, by the way, this is what happens. People don't know the basics of how our government works, right down to the fact that when write-in ballots come in, mail-in ballots come in, they come in, and Republican government said, no, we're not going to count those first. We're going to count them last. So then when people go to bed at night and they wake up and they go, well, what happened? I went to bed and we were winning. And then all of a sudden they counted all these other votes and they were mysterious votes. Oh, my God. And people fell for it because they have no idea how our government works. How do you think it worked when they were bringing in votes on horseback or mule train? My God. All right. The most ignorant among us are going to lead. Is that how it's going to be? And the most ignorant are going to resort to, yes, authoritarian measures. They always have and they always will. I don't want it. I know you don't either. None of us do. Is voting enough? Boy, I sure hope so, because, as soon as we lift a finger in defense against these Nazis, it's the old basketball rule. We're going to be called for the foul. Doesn't matter they smack the back of our head 8 or 10 times. As soon as we turn around and make a threatening gesture, we're going to get teed up. 2 of them and you're out of the game. Okay. Voting better be enough. That's why they're trying to get rid of our ability to vote, because we don't vote the way the ignorant Nazis want us to vote. And they got to put on some sort of airs that they have a legitimacy because they've been voted in. Where'd they learn that? Vladimir Putin. Okay. Maybe Vlad learned it from the School of Americas, too. You never know. I mean, the KGB infiltrated a lot of places. What do we have on the curated part of our show? Because we do, as you know, have a curated part of the show. At the top, yes, Rachel broke it down that the violence by Trump-loyal fascist paramilitary groups that has been in the news lately lines up neatly with the political targeting by Republican politicians, just like the brown shirts did. On the rest of the menu, an explosive device was found at the home of a San Jose, California city councilwoman. The Border Patrol is investigating an unofficial challenge coin distributed among the agency that depicts white border agents using their reins, while on horseback, as whips against black migrants. And the historic floodwaters that continue to rage through Yellowstone has dramatically changed the landscape. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a Cambodian court convicted a lawyer and dozens of others of treason for organizing an opposition party to longtime Prime Minister Hun Sen. And China says a Bloomberg News assistant in Beijing has been released on bail after being detained in 2020 on charges of endangering national security. Well, it's about time. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and she's quite busy in real life, and we thank Kelly for doing everything that she does. If you out there in radio listening land would look across the page from that chat room link to the left at our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will hopefully notice the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, even in these price gouging, inflationary times, those funds really help us pay our bills and continue this powerhouse of resistance. So, please, if you could, we need the money, and I'm not kidding. And also, thank you to those of you out there who have been so generous. I cannot express how helpful it really is. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. He's pretty darn busy in his real life, and we thank Tom for doing everything that he does as well. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary, incidentally, on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And then I really do try to get the links of the show notes and links linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms. And anyway, find those links to the show notes and links. And that's where the real reportage can be found. That's right. We are very transparent here. Nothing to hide. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And, of course, just so you know, the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library for the last 11 years, can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. I like saying that, org. It's very Western. Is it? Maybe. All right. This, speaking of Western, this first offering comes from the Associated Press. And it looks like staff have been writing this piece. Well, police were investigating yesterday, Tuesday, after an explosive device was found at the home of San Jose City Council member Dev Davis. Davis was home with her family in the Willow Glen neighborhood Tuesday morning when a neighbor found a suspicious device near her house. Her family and nearby neighbors were evacuated. A bomb squad confirmed the device was explosive. Although they did not immediately provide details, the device had been removed by yesterday afternoon, Tuesday. No arrests have been made. Davis was elected to the city council in 2016 and won re-election in 2020. She ran unsuccessfully for mayor in the June 7 primary election. In a statement, Davis said she was seriously disturbed that someone might have targeted her because she is an elected official. This further erodes our democracy and our ability to attract good people to run for public office, she said. And I say, that's a feature, not a bug. Michael Wilner and Jacqueline Charles of the Miami Herald bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A controversial moment captured last fall on the U.S. southern border of an officer on horseback chasing Haitian migrants with his reins raised like a lash in Del Rio, Texas, has been memorialized on a challenge coin that has led to an investigation by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Images of the incident led to a public outcry and a national scandal, with President Joe Biden demanding accountability for the officers and the DHS launching an independent investigation into the treatment of migrants there. Nearly a year later, the results of the investigation still have not been made public. The unofficial coin, a token of memorabilia, embraces some of the most controversial elements of the scandal, where video footage appeared to show white border agents on horseback using their reins as whips against black migrants. For some, the images invoked grim reminders of slave patrols, and for others, the historical mistreatment of Haitian refugees in the United States. Reining it in since May 28, 1924. The coin reads on one side, "Yesterday's border is not today's border," read on the other. And images obtained by McClatchy and the Miami Herald also show a warning on the rim of the coin: "You will be returned." Wow. Sounds like a lot of brown shirt Nazi Gestapos working there, doesn't it? Yes, it does. 41 of the coins were recently sold on eBay for $15.19 apiece. Advocates have also come across images of yellow and black coasters showing a man on horseback with his reins in the air, chasing a family of 3. It was not immediately clear how many of the coins were made or distributed. Customs and Border Protection's Offices of Professional Responsibility is investigating the creation of the coins and whether anyone at CBP is selling them. Any who are will face appropriate action, said Louis Miranda, a CBP assistant commissioner, who said the agency's chief counsel will also send a cease and desist letter to any vendor who produces unauthorized challenge coins using one of Custom Border Protection's trademarked brands. Matthew Brown and Lindsay Whitehurst of the Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The forces of fire and ice shaped Yellowstone National Park over thousands of years. It took decades longer for humans to tame it enough for tourists to visit, often from the comfort of their own cars, in just days. Heavy rain and rapid snowmelt caused a dramatic flood that may forever alter the human footprint on the park's terrain and the communities that have grown around it. The historic floodwaters that raced through Yellowstone this week and continue to tear out bridges and pouring into nearby homes pushed a popular fishing river off course, possibly permanently, and may force roadways nearly torn away by torrents of water to be rebuilt in new places. The landscape literally and figuratively has changed dramatically in the last 36 hours, said Bill Berg, a commissioner in nearby Park County. It is a little bit ironic that this spectacular landscape was created by violent geologic and hydrologic events, and it is just not very handy when it happens while we're all here settled on it. The unprecedented flooding drove more than 10,000 visitors out of the nation's oldest national park and damaged hundreds of homes in nearby communities, though remarkably, no one was reported hurt or killed. The only visitors left in the massive park, straddling 3 states, were a dozen campers still making their way out of the backcountry. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, body horror elevated. Crimes of the Future is a hard movie to classify, which just might be the intention of the film's Canadian writer-director David Cronenberg. Set sometime in the near future, the humans in Crimes of the Future have evolved past their ability to feel pain, which isn't a stretch after enduring the prescription drug ads in an average hour of TV. Along with that, they are developing, as in the case with the protagonist Saul, the ability to grow new organs. Saul, in fact, has turned this into performance art. Along with his creative and life life partner Caprice, he now entertains paying audiences with live surgeries depicted with disturbing precision. Saw, played by a wonderfully understated Viggo Mortensen, is an artist who literally exposes and places himself in vulnerable situations. His insides being revealed is symbolically analogous to Cronenberg's own life. It can be interpreted almost as a roundabout autobiography. Written over 20 years ago, this is Cronenberg at the peak of his weirdness. This film isn't for everyone, nor is it easy to understand, but nonetheless it is one of the most original and starkly beautiful films to have come out in some time. Everything from the cast, fronted by the aforementioned Mortensen, with performances from Léa Seydoux and Kristen Stewart, to the retro sets with some of the strangest furniture you'll ever see, work to great effect. This one achieves notoriety for working in a genre that often goes horribly wrong and creating a thoughtful and profound mystery, drama, and meditation on what it means to be human, even as humans constantly grow and change. An art house feature that cares little for a satisfying conclusion, Crimes of the Future is an intellectual exercise that makes for an unforgettable movie experience. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Hedgehogs are a lot of things. They're small and spiky, covered in quills, and some people even say they're cute. Now, a new study says that they are also the origin of resistance to methicillin, an antibiotic derived from penicillin. That pointed observation appears in the journal Nature. Antibiotic resistance is a huge clinical problem, and methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, otherwise known as MRSA or MRSA, can be difficult to treat, as many have developed resistance to a handful of our frontline therapeutics.
Historically, it has been assumed that resistance in disease-causing bacteria, including Staph aureus, is a modern phenomenon driven by clinical use of antibiotics.
Jesper Larsen is a senior scientist at the Statens Serum Institute in Copenhagen,
which is the Danish equivalent of the CDC in the US.
Methicillin resistance was thought to be tied to prescription, in part because methicillin-resistant bugs were first isolated from British hospitals just a year after the drug became available for clinical use.
But a couple of years ago, we found out by chance that MRSA is present in more than 60% of hedgehogs from Denmark and Sweden.
Okay, what's MRSA? Methicillin and penicillin belong to the so-called beta-lactam family of antibiotics. They kill bacteria by inhibiting enzymes the bugs use to build their protective cell walls. MEC-C and a related gene MEC-A encode versions of the enzymes that the antibiotics don't latch onto as well.
Staph aureus bacteria carrying these genes are therefore resistant to most beta-lactam antibiotics.
But where did these resistance genes come from? They've been spotted not only in folks with staph infections, but in livestock, like pigs and cattle, and in some wild animals. And in Sweden, Larsen found that MEC-C is really common in hedgehogs.
So the big question was, why hedgehogs carry so much MEC-C MRSA?
To find out, Larsen went to the library,
where I came across an old study from the 1960s, which showed that a particular fungus in hedgehogs is able to produce a penicillin-like antibiotics that is very similar to methicillin.
So hedgehogs with this particular skin fungus would naturally be exposed to penicillin, and that could have launched an evolutionary arms race that drove the hedgehog's resident bacteria to evolve resistance.
This was a real eureka moment and led us to hypothesize that wild hedgehogs has been a natural reservoir of MEC-C MRSA long before penicillin and methicillin came on the market.
To confirm this suspicion, Larsen and his colleagues screened hedgehogs from Europe and New Zealand. They found that hedgehogs in Scandinavia and the UK harbor a heavy load of MEC-C MRSA. They also found that the fungus carried by those hedgehogs had all the genes they needed to produce penicillin.
We then went on and sequenced and analyzed the genomes of around 1,000 MEC-C MRSA isolates, which showed that they first appeared in hedgehogs in the early 1800s, long before we started to use antibiotics in human and veterinary medicine.
Now, that doesn't mean that we should feel free to use antibiotics all over the place, because it's not our fault, it's the hedgehogs. Because if having antibiotics around encourages bacteria to evolve resistance, taking antibiotics away robs them of their superpower, and it leaves them a little bit weaker than their non-resistant kin.
It is often very energy-consuming to produce the enzymes and inactivate the antibiotics. This means that resistant bacteria will often be outcompeted by susceptible bacteria in periods where they are not exposed to antibiotics.
So, if we really want to show MRSA no mercy, we should keep the methicillin to a minimum, and maybe keep at least a quill's length away from Scandinavian hedgehogs. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkins.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we'll explain how to interpret COVID deaths among vaccinated and unvaccinated people.
We'll discuss why so few people are getting booster shots.
Plus, the latest news on new vaccines.
In the last few months, a fair number of people who died of COVID were vaccinated. Yet studies showed vaccination protects people, especially from severe illness. And this seems like a big contradiction. Are these studies wrong?
Josh, it's a common misconception that because vaccinated people can get and occasionally die from COVID, the vaccines must not work. But you need to understand the context. Our graphics editor Amanda Montañez and I published a story on this. We used CDC data from a subset of U.S. jurisdictions that have tracked vaccination and booster status and COVID deaths for people 12 and older. In March, among people vaccinated with just the primary series, that is 2 shots of Pfizer or Moderna or 1 shot of J&J, there were 143 deaths, and there were 383 deaths among unvaccinated people.
Okay, but that still seems like a lot of deaths among vaccinated people. What am I missing here?
Well, these figures don't take into account the incidence rate. In other words, the number of deaths divided by the total number of people who were vaccinated or unvaccinated. If you do that, you'll see that vaccinated people die at a far lower rate from COVID than unvaccinated people. In fact, the unvaccinated had 8 times the death rate of people vaccinated with the primary series only, and 17 times the rate of people who were vaccinated and received at least 1 booster shot.
That seems more in line with what we've been told about the vaccine's effectiveness, but isn't it true that they're less effective among older people?
Yes, we know that older Americans are more likely to get severely ill or die from COVID in general, and while the vaccines are very protective, their efficacy wanes over time. That's why it's so important to get booster shots. As time goes on, you're likely to see more COVID deaths among the vaccinated simply because a greater number of unvaccinated people will die from the virus, and there are more vaccinated people in general. But if you're vaccinated, your risk of dying from COVID is still far lower. Booster shots are even more important now, as new Omicron variants such as BA4 and BA5 roll across the country. Yet not a lot of people are getting the extra shots. Josh, what do the booster numbers tell us?
The numbers don't look very good, honestly. And that's especially true among people 65 and older who have been the most vulnerable to the disease. This group was very eager when it came to the original round of vaccines a year ago. 91% of them got vaccinated. But things changed with boosters. For the first booster shot, just 68% of the senior citizen group got them. And second boosters have reached only 30% of these people.
That's distressing, since this is such a high-risk group. About 3/4 of the deaths in the U.S. have been among senior citizens, right?
Yes, and it's frustrating because boosters really reduce their risk. Antibodies against the virus drop to lower levels 4 months after the primary shots, and protection wanes along with them. But a booster turns things around. A study of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines among older people showed that a booster shot reduced the risk of hospitalization by more than 60%. The booster lowered the chances of death by between 75 and 79%.
So that begs the question, why don't older people get these protective extra shots?
There seem to be a number of reasons, Tanya, and one of the big ones is that officials are not making boosters easily available, in contrast to what they did with the original vaccines. Remember the government pushed out the first vaccines to nursing homes? Large-scale vaccination clinics popped up all over the place in sports stadiums and schools and other places supported by FEMA and other federal agencies. Many of these clinics were near public transit for ease of access, and there was a huge public messaging blitz. That just hasn't happened with boosters, either for the third or fourth shot. Eric Topol, director of the Scripps Research Translational Institute, told me the CDC really didn't promote boosters for months. The agency merely said that people had an option to get them. Topol says the CDC needed to be much more emphatic and state that people should get the shots because they're essential protection. He's very critical of this lapse and says that the messaging was badly botched.
That doesn't sound good. Were there other problems?
There were. Nursing homes have been using the same services they used to deliver flu shots, and those are spottier. There are no big clinics, no big ad campaigns. People have to sign up for booster shots at pharmacies, and the online registration there can be very confusing. So awareness is lower and access is harder.
So are there ways to get past these obstacles?
There are places that have done well with boosters, and they show what works. Minnesota, for instance, has the highest first booster percentage in the country at 83%. Dakota County in the state has done exceptionally well, reports Kaiser Health News. It hired an agency that brought boosters to nursing homes. The county also ran clinics at lunch and in the evenings. It used money provided by Congress to purchase a mobile vaccine van, which traveled to different neighborhoods. Health workers walked through those neighborhoods, answering questions about the importance of boosters and building awareness. The county also used federal pandemic funds to give people $50 vouchers for the shots, which helped cover costs for those who had to pay to travel to get to a clinic. Now it's time for efforts like this on a national level, Topol says. Boosters need a big push, and he told me what the message should be, firmly and strongly. This shot could save your life.
There's more vaccine news, too. The Food and Drug Administration's Vaccine Advisory Committee voted nearly unanimously last week to authorize another COVID vaccine made by the company Novavax.
The new vaccine, which uses a more conventional preparation based on proteins from the virus instead of genetic material, joins Moderna's and Pfizer's mRNA vaccines and Johnson & Johnson's adenovirus vaccine. The FDA is now looking closely at the reliability of the Novavax manufacturing process. If the agency is satisfied and follows the committee's recommendation, the shot could be available in the U.S. in the coming weeks.
In addition, Moderna announced that it has a booster dose that targets the Omicron variant as well as the original version. That booster produced a better antibody response than the original version alone. They did not test how well it actually protected against disease, though.
The company said it will give this data to the FDA and hopes the Omicron booster will be ready in early fall if authorized. The agency also plans to have a meeting at the end of June to decide which variant should be included in coming boosters. Their hope is to keep up with this ever-evolving virus.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out Siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Don't you wish your life came with a warning app?
Stop. That dog does not want to be petted.
A heads up before something bad happens.
You should not send that text.
Uh-oh. Life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes, you can reverse prediabetes and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. To learn your risk, take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Active citizenship means getting involved in the life of your community and nation so that you can help determine the country's future. One irony of our hyper-connected digital age is that people can feel isolated, but there are many ways to get involved. First, figure out what issues are most important to you. Is it the environment, healthcare, abortion, homelessness, gun violence, racism? For each of these issues, there are groups you can join that advocate for solutions. Second, when considering which organization to join, ask yourself whether you would prefer working with religious or secular groups. Third, research the organization's history. Have they been around for a long time? What is their track record? You might search for news about the organization from reputable sources before taking the plunge. Does this group have a good reputation? What do they have to say about the issues you care about? When French historian Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States in the 1830s, he was impressed that Americans got together to solve their own problems. You can honor this legacy by getting involved. After all, our nation's future depends on you. This episode was made possible by the support of T-Mobile. 60-second civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
Warning, this Civil Liberties Minute uses a racial epithet. I'm Bill Newman. There are hundreds upon hundreds of them. Mountains, valleys, creeks, lakes, and other physical landmarks that have one thing in common. The word, here comes the racial epithet, squaw in their name. Squaw Valley, for example. The ubiquity of that racial epithet and its offensiveness is the subject of a featured article in a recent edition of the Sierra Club magazine titled, What's in a Name? By Dina Giulio Whitaker. The article, after noting the unclear etymology of the word, goes on to say, quote, it's inarguable that over the centuries the word has become a misogynist and racist slur directed at indigenous women. After that, the article spells the offensive word SQ****. Last November, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland created a process to review and replace names of places on federal lands that are derogatory. In explaining her classification of this word as derogatory and offensive, Secretary Haaland said, our nation's lands and waters should be places to celebrate the outdoors and our shared cultural heritage, not to perpetuate the legacies of oppression. A history of racism and attempted genocide must not be ignored, it must be recognized. But certainly that history need not be honored or celebrated. The effort to replace the names of places that denigrate Native women, that effort is welcome and long overdue. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1990. About 400 janitors were protesting at Century City, a large office complex in Los Angeles. It was part of SEIU's Justice for Janitors campaign in LA. The janitors had gone out on strike against international service systems. The strike had started on May 30th, and despite promises that they would not interfere with the protest, the LAPD showed up wielding batons. They demanded the janitors immediately vacate the premises. But instead of dispersing, the protesters linked arms, and in a show of solidarity, they marched toward the 150 police dressed in riot gear. Police responded by savagely beating protesters, clubbing people on the ground as they tried to stand back up. One demonstrator, who was 3 months pregnant, suffered a miscarriage caused by the police beating. The media recorded the brutal attack. Coverage spurred outrage at the actions of the police that day. It also made the janitors more determined than ever to win a contract. Public pressure resulted in a new contract with a $2 an hour raise for the janitors. They also won family health care coverage. SEIU filed suit over the police conduct, and 3 years later, the LA City Council awarded the union more than $2.3 million. But the police did not have to admit guilt for the attack. 200 janitors gathered on the steps of City Hall to await the settlement decision. Joel Vasquez, one of the janitors who was beaten on that day, addressed the crowd saying, "The people who are supposed to protect us didn't. They beat us." Today has become a day of commemoration of the janitors' struggle. In 2001, janitors gathered in LA to remember that past victory and rally for economic justice. One marcher carried a sign that read, "What's dignity? New shoes for my daughter, a birthday party for my son." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 55 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low 80s. And sunshine with clouds mixed, winds out of the northwest at a brisk 10 to 15 miles per hour. Lows overnight will be around 51 with some clouds, and winds will be out of the west at 10 to 15 miles per hour and mainly cloudy tomorrow, with highs dropping to the low 70s with winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like we will have close to a quarter-inch of rain coming on Friday. We'll see if that changes when we get to tomorrow. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County, of course, have not been updated, so we will update you when they get updated. Grass pollen right outside the window here in Rogue River proper is very high. The air quality index for the region is good at 26 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains very high at level 9. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.98 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is at a sticky, yes, continuing to be sticky, 88%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 81 degrees and sunny. Paris is a sweltering 88 and sunny. Rome is an equally sweltering 92 and fair with a heat advisory. I don't know how fair that is. Kyiv is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. Kabul is 77 and clear. Hong Kong is 77 with a light rain shower. Tokyo is 64 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 56 and clear. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Sofan Jiang of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A Cambodian-American lawyer and dozens of members of a now-dissolved opposition party were convicted of treason yesterday, Tuesday, in a trial that is part of efforts to tame opposition to the long-running rule of Prime Minister Hun Sen. Lawyer Thierry Seng and most of the other defendants were charged over a failed attempt by the leader of the defunct Cambodian National Rescue Party to return from exile in 2019. Cambodian authorities blocked Sam Rains's return and alleged that the 60 defendants were involved in organizing his trip, which Thierry Seng and the others have denied. Cambodian courts are widely believed to be under the influence of Hun Sen, whose authoritarian rule has kept him in power for 37 years. The Cambodian National Rescue Party was his party's biggest rival before it was disbanded by a court ruling just ahead of the national elections in 2018 that resulted in a clean sweep by Hun Sen's Cambodia People's Party. The mass trials against political opposition members are really about preventing any electoral challenge to Prime Minister Hun Sen's rule, but they have also come to symbolize the death of Cambodia's democracy Phil Robertson, Deputy Asia Director of New York-based Human Rights Watch, said in a statement, "By creating a political dynamic that relies on intimidation and persecution of government critics, Hun Sen demonstrates his total disregard for democratic rights." The Phnom Penh Municipal Court found Thierry Sang and most of the others guilty of conspiracy to commit treason. Thierry Sang was sentenced to 6 years in jail, and the others received sentences of 5 to 8 years. Many of the 60 defendants earlier fled into exile or went into hiding, and it was not immediately clear how many appeared in court for the verdict. Thierry Sang stood outside the court as the verdict was announced, saying she wanted her arrest to be public and not in the shadows. Journalists saw at least 3 police officers approach her, hold her hand and body, and then push her into a waiting police truck after the verdict came. She was dressed as Lady Liberty in a light green gown and a crown with freedom written on it. She carried an imitation torch, which she raised and shouted, "Free the political prisoners." She has worn thematic costumes to her court sessions to publicize her belief that Cambodia is not a democratic nation and that the trial is unfair.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press staff bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Chinese news assistant in Beijing for Bloomberg News has been released on bail, the American Financial News Service reported, citing the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. However, Bloomberg said in an online article that it has not been able to contact Hazy Fan, who was detained in Beijing in December of 2020 on suspicion of endangering national security. China's State Security Authority released Fan in January pending trial, according to a statement on the Chinese embassy website. Bloomberg said it had been made aware of the statement over the weekend. The charge of endangering national security has a broadly defined one that can lead to lengthy detention with little recourse to legal assistance. We are encouraged that Hazy is out on bail. John Micklethwait, Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, was quoted as saying, "She is a much valued member of our Beijing bureau, and we will continue to do everything possible to help her and her family." Fan began working for Bloomberg in 2017 after stints with other foreign news organizations in China. Her detention followed that in August of 2020 of Sheng Li, an Australian journalist who was born in China and worked for CGTN. Cheng was tried behind closed doors in March. A verdict has not been announced. The Committee to Protect Journalists tweeted that Chinese authorities must immediately drop any pending charges against Fan and release Cheng Li. The Chinese embassy statement denied that Fan's case is related to press freedom or her working for foreign media in China. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.